All right, we're live.
We're live.
This is our. I feel so excited to be
I'm
back
super
in
excited.
podcast world.
I am. I'm super excited. And I'm excited to do it on Today's Mama.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
hello to the Today's Mama community. I'm Nate Bagley, and this is Kristin Hodson.
Hi.
Kristin is a licensed and certified sex therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good way of saying that?
Yeah.
ASEX certified sex therapist?
I'm a licensed clinical social worker and ASEX certified sex therapist.
I should know that by now. I've said it so many times.
There's so many letters. We can't keep up with them.
That's true.
Not behind my name. Just letters in letter
general.
soup. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm Nate Bagley, and I am the host and the creator of a podcast called The Lovumentary. And the folks over at Today's Mama asked us to drop by and start sharing some content. We wanted to share our podcast here on this Facebook page. And so we're excited to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about, for a good 10 episodes, probably the next couple of months, every week we're going to come talk to you about the topic for the season is sex. So we're going to be presenting different ideas in different ways that you can enhance your sexual relationship with your partner, or
which is a passion of mine, and I feel passionate that people can develop. I view it as skills, not just something that people are good at or bad at or inherently somehow hit the lottery and learning how to do this, but with some skills and insight and practice that people can really develop and improve intimacy and sex in their lives.
Awesome. And I just love talking about sex, so I'm stoked to be here and act as the non-expert and just ask tons of questions so that we make sure we understand everything.
Love it.
So we wanted to start episode 1 off with a quote, and the topic of the day is, we're starting at the very basics. We're starting with, how do we get better at talking about sex, because a lot of us get really uncomfortable with it. So the quote of the day, do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's by Jim Rohn, and it says, "Take advantage of every opportunity to practice your communication skills so that when the important occasion arises, you will have the gift, the style, the sharpness, the clarity, and the emotions to affect other people."
I love this quote.
Tell me why.
The reason why I love it is because we often talk about sex when things become heated, when there's a problem, when there's tension, and oftentimes those conversations don't go well. They don't go well, and then we end up having a fight, and we end up having a negative cycle, and it's just frustrating. Mm-hmm. And so what I love about this quote is, one, that it's a skill. Mm-hmm. It's something to be practiced, and to be practiced in those moments when things are going well, or when it's not after sex or during a fight, or that we take the plunge and stretch to talk about it at dinner, when we're out walking around the neighborhood, holding hands, date night, so that then when it becomes a little bit more tense, I don't even want to say heated,
right,
but we feel more anxious, or that we have already started to develop our skill set around it, and we feel a little bit more confident.
I love it. So the theme of today is going to be practice, getting the practice in. And one of the things that we're going to try to do with every single episode that we record, and I want to make this, that was an in and out burp. So you all right?
I'm good.
Is it weird that I'm just me?
You're just so you. You're so you.
So one of the things that we really want to do with every single episode of the podcast is we want to focus on giving you something that you can put into practice. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people will turn into a podcast like this, or a show like this, or read a book, or go to a seminar, and they learn a lot of great stuff. But unless you put it into action and go home and do something about it, it doesn't affect your life. And the good feeling that you get can be addicting, of just like learning stuff.
Yeah, like reading a self-help book can actually feel like you're doing something for your marriage.
But you're not really doing anything unless you put it into practice.
Right.
So let's dive in. I have a question for you.
Okay.
So why do people struggle to talk about sex? We already kind of touched on it a little bit. It's a little uncomfortable sometimes. But
it's a little uncomfortable, but the reality is most of us, I would say good majority of us, didn't grow up in homes where it was modeled or talked about. Like, our parents weren't talking to us about it. Culturally, it's pretty taboo. It's something that isn't talked about, can be kind of shameful, kind of weird, kind of awkward. Mm-hmm. I think those are some really beginning things. I think we're really embarrassed to tell the truth or talk about what we want or say.
Yeah.
Sex is kind of messy. And so there's an embarrassment factor.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes, both and. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, I mean, speaking it is hard to ask for what you want sometimes.
Oh, I find that people, when I ask them, like, okay, so and this is kind of in counseling, but if I ask them to tell me like, what do you want? Because they come in with the problem is I don't have a satisfying sex life.
Yeah.
They're stumped. But if I switch the question, I'm like, well, tell me what you don't like.
And they have a list of things that they hate. Oh my gosh, I hate it when he does this, or when she doesn't do this, it drives me nuts.
Yes. And so I think even that, the wanting and to share with your partner what you do want, there can be a vulnerability of what if they think I'm weird? What if they think that's weird? What if blah, blah, blah.
Well, so there was actually a study done that was released, I think, last year by the Journal of it was released in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, and they found that 30% of women report pain during vaginal sex, yet a sizable proportion of Americans can never tell their partner. They never tell their partner when they're in pain.
Yeah.
So if you like, I'm just thinking in my brain, which is where I always think in my brain. And if you've got a big chunk of women who are experiencing pain when they're having sex and they don't talk about it, what else are people not talking about?
So orgasm. What about faking orgasm? You are communicating something entirely.
Fakes.
I'm sure never.
No, she doesn't.
No,
she
right.
promised.
But I think there's a lot of things that they're not communicating, but
Yeah.
pain, orgasm, again, all these things.
What they want, their fantasies,
Oh, yeah.
when they want it,
How
why they don't want it.
How they want to be touched, where they want to be touched, what they, in that moment when you're being touched, like I want more of that. Oof, it's so vulnerable and doable to talk about these things. Mm-hmm.
But that study just made me think, like, if people aren't talking about even the pain that they're experiencing, there's probably a lot of other stuff that they're not talking about as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about, or a little bit about, like, why people don't talk about sex. And whoever's listening to this podcast, they all have their reasons for why they don't communicate things. And the reasons aren't necessarily what's important, but what's important is I want people to leave equipped with some sort of skill to help them actually be successful in it.
Mm-hmm.
So can we talk a little bit about, I don't know, maybe we can start by talking about how to start talking about it. Like, why do people struggle to start the conversation?
Mm-hmm. So I'm often telling couples that they're having sex before they even talked about sex. Like, if you go back and think about it, you and Ange were probably kissing and making out before you ever had a conversation. And then you may have gone back and had a conversation.
Yeah.
But some people progress sexually and still never ever talk about it. Yeah. And they give each other different signals. Like, so here's an example of how we communicate, not explicitly, but there's so much communication happening about sex, but may not be productive. I had a couple where she knew when he wanted to have sex because she would go into the living room and the remote would be turned sideways. If the remote was sideways, it was business time that night.
Okay.
But
was that like his secret code?
That was the code. They never had the conversation, yet somehow, you know, through the court, they picked up on it, and then that was the thing.
All right.
Or the locking of the door.
Right.
There's all these things happening, but imagine what it could be like if you could actually start to talk about it and plan it. So just even learning to talk about it, I encourage couples and people to start saying, what do you think about starting to talk about our sex life?
Yeah, having a conversation about how you want to have the conversation, I think is a really good place to start. Like,
even being able to say, I don't know where to start. Like, we want to talk about sex, but to be honest with you, I have no idea where to start.
Yeah.
That can give a lot of permission to your partner to be like, I don't either. And then you can not know together.
Yeah. And then start at least at ground zero.
Exactly. Together.
Be on the same page.
And not get frustrated that neither of you know, but to be like, yeah, neither of us know. That's a great place to start.
Right. So if you were to set up like that conversation about how to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Do you have any other tips?
Well, so the thing that comes to mind with this is setting some parameters, again, because you're going to have a variety of couples in different stages and phases and histories around how they talk about sex or don't, or fighting. But setting boundaries around how do we want to do this? One, let's not do this right after sex.
Ooh, I like this. Set up some ground rules.
Like setting up some boundaries and ground rules.
I feel like when you have this conversation outside, when you have it in the wrong context, it's going to go poorly.
Yeah.
Because it's such a sensitive topic. Like, people get so wrapped around the axle when it comes to sex, because your sexual relationship and your sexual identity says so much about you. Like your body image is part of that, your self-worth is part of that, your desirability is part of that, what your partner thinks about you, whether or not your partner desires you. Like those are all things we're super self-conscious about. And if the conversation about sex goes poorly, it reflects really poorly on probably some of the things most of us are most sensitive about.
Absolutely.
So having some ground rules in place is yeah. Okay, let's talk more about the ground rules. I just love the idea of setting them.
But I don't want to quite move on from it because I think it so matters. And so this is something that I encourage couples, like, take a moment, sit down when the kids are put to bed, have some tea or your favorite, like an icy glass of water, whatever.
I was totally expecting you to say crumpets.
Crumpets. That's great. But get your thing. And take 20 minutes and be like, let's come up with some rules. Even if doing this, we're talking about sex, but creating ground rules for fighting in general. Yeah. Like, fantastic.
Good idea.
Yes. Yeah. So do that. Like, have the conversation around, let's talk about sex. What do we want it to look like? The ground rules that you're both agreeing on and both negotiating and you're both contributing to. Definitely.
And maybe even thinking before you have the conversation about why has this been a difficult conversation to have in the past?
Yeah.
Like, what are my emotions around this, and why do I have these emotions?
Oh, that's so hard.
If this is a hard conversation to have for a reason, what is the reason? Is it because, like, it reflects on all of the scary things that I've always avoided? Is it because it's something that contradicts, like, maybe you were raised never to talk about sex and you feel ashamed talking about it.
Yeah.
And so you avoid it because it brings up all these old feelings of shame.
I was going to say, all of us have our own. So you have your own sexual story. Your partner has their own sexual story. And then you as a couple have another story. So you're bringing a lot to
three
the
stories
table,
colliding at the same time.
And they're interacting with each other and they're creating collisions. And so some of the things is learning how to calm reactivity.
Give me an example of how stories can collide. Like, what do you mean by that?
Good thing. So if I'm going to say, because a high number of women have a history of sexual abuse. That is unfortunately, and actually a lot of men. So if that's a part of my history and you say something or do something that triggers that part of my history, I'm now reacting to you, which then could react to your story of potential rejection, or I went out on a limb and you just rejected me. So now I'm going to shut down, and now together we just created another funk in our relationship.
Tornado of angriness.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one example of how stories can collide.
Yeah.
I always think of people going into their marriages with suitcase. Like, we all have our baggage. Yep. You've got your suitcase. I've got my suitcase.
Mine's like a Samsonite, big old, like,
and I've got like 4 bags.
Yeah.
But really, we're bringing that. And most of the time, we don't see what's in each other's suitcases until we're married.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we're like, whoa, that's in there. And you may not even know that you had something packed in your suitcase until your partner triggers it.
Yeah.
So even recognizing that this could be hard and I don't know what this is going to look like, and to set some grace in there, like to have some patience and leeway that this is going to be flimsy and clumsy, and that's a good thing.
So maybe a great way to start then is to have this conversation before you have the conversation, and say something along the lines of, like, pull your partner aside and say, look, I want to have a better sex life. I know you want to have a better sex life too. And I don't really know where to start. And I'm scared to even talk to you about this, but I want to do this and I want you to be in it with me. Like, can we start having conversations about our sex life? Or can you get on board with that? And if your partner gets on board, then you say, great, let's set some rules up together.
Yeah.
So that we can make sure that we do this and we don't, like, get angry at each other or fight with each other or lash out at each other and hurt each other.
Well, and what I like that you said in there is you came from a place of vulnerability and honesty and authenticity. You also spoke from the positive about your partner.
Yeah.
Instead of putting them onto the defensive first.
Get them excited about the vision.
I want to tell you what's not working. Yeah. And we should probably talk about that. They're not going to want to talk about that. But if it's, I want to have these conversations to improve our sex life with you.
I want to have amazing, connected, passionate, like, sex. like
who doesn't love
bottom
that?
Of the World Series, bases loaded, full count,
Right.
down by 3, swing for the fences, knock it out of the ballpark, grand slam kind of sex. Like, that's the kind of sex I want to have. Are you on board with that? Like, do you want that kind of sex, or are you cool with the vanilla stuff?
Right. And with that, then I would come back and be like, yes, because I want that same kind of emotional connection where we are seeing each other and we're on the same page and we feel like we're really on the same team. I cannot do all the enthusiasm and passion uses. Amazing. But yes, that's the best place you can start, because what partner isn't going to want to be like, really, you want that with me?
Yeah.
And you are willing to seek me out to have this conversation? Yeah, let's do that.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome.
So that's a good place to start.
It's a good place to start.
So then ground rules, like what are some good ground rules to set up to keep people from being jerks to each other? Because I think people aren't jerks to each other on purpose when they talk about this stuff. It's because we get scared and a little vulnerable, and it's easy to get hurt when you're vulnerable because your armor's off.
Defend. We get defensive.
We poke and attack. We attack back.
Absolutely.
We protect ourselves from the unintentional hurts.
Absolutely.
So like let's give everybody some ground rules that they can that they can kind of set in place in their relationship to protect themselves from needing to fight about it.
Okay, because if the goal is to have a good conversation that brings you closer together, if that's the point,
that is the point,
then these things are setting it up. One would be, and this is just, don't talk about sex before or after an experience, but particularly after an experience, unless it's,
you don't want to give me a play-by-play of all the things that I can do better?
No,
I would
don't do that. Exactly.
Nobody wants that.
And unless you're going to be like, that was wonderful, thank you, or that was amazing.
So only positive feedback after sex.
Yep. No
criticisms.
If you guys start to set this up and you're like, yeah, I'm open to it, and be like, so is it okay if I share something with you? Say, actually, it's not okay. Let's not, because that's one of our ground rules. We're not going to talk about it in the bedroom.
Do you know why I think that's important?
What part?
The not talking about this stuff after you have sex.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you why I think it's important.
Tell me.
And you can tell me that I'm right.
Fantastic.
So there is no place on the planet that you spend more time with your partner than in bed.
Yeah.
Like for most couples, like if you sleep next to each other and you're spending like 8 hours a day in bed together, and then you leave each other for work and you don't really like, that's the one place that you're just constantly with each other, and you share some of your most intimate moments there.
Right.
And if you start associating, I'm going to tell you a quick story.
Okay.
So I had this like really horrible boss a couple of years ago. Like he like made fun of me in front of other people. He would swear at me. He told me once that like I should give up on my dreams because I was never going to achieve them. He was just like loved to take a dump on my self-confidence and dreams all the time.
Yeah.
And I hated that guy so much. And I used to get anxiety every morning when I woke up and had to go to work, and just like felt this, because I just didn't want to go there. I didn't want to be in that place where I was feeling criticized and picked apart and humiliated. So then I quit the job and left. And just a couple weeks ago, I decided where was I going? I was running to a store, like a barbershop or something like that. And it was in the same area as my old office. And I drove past the office building, and that anxiety came back. Just seeing the building. Yeah. And I realized that I associated all of the negative experiences and emotions that I had with that boss with the space that I had it in.
Interesting.
And I would hate to have my wife associate any negative feelings that she has towards me with our bedroom.
Yeah.
Like, I do not want my wife going to bed every night going, oh man, we're going to have, like, remember the last time we were in here and he just tore me to pieces because of the feedback that I gave him.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fantastic point, because on the flip side of that, you can make it a really positive, safe space to where you are connecting and you have experiences that you're building on. Mm-hmm. And so part of what's happening here is setting the boundaries to protect that space. Like I'm hearing you say, another ground rule would be like, let's keep our bedroom sacred.
Yes.
And let's hold that, which means both parties are responsible for doing that. I know some couples that don't even let their kids in their bedroom. Yeah. They're like, nope, this is mommy and daddy's space. Yeah. Yeah. And so each couple would have to figure out what that means. The other thing I'd say is, say words, and I love this one. Say words that make you uncomfortable out loud. Like orgasm. Good like job. That. Thank you.
Vagina.
Do that. I actually do something when I do workshops with couples is I pass around envelopes and I put in all the words.
I feel bad for somebody who just barely tuned in to me just going vagina.
So I pass out these envelopes and in it is all these different words, like all these sexual health words. And then they have to stand up and say it like they're announcing the Grammy winner. And it's
I love
really fun.
What are some of the words?
So you have penis, you have vagina, you have vulva, scrotum.
Clitoris.
Yep. You just
orgasm. You already said that one.
And the reality is for a lot of us, we didn't grow up saying these words, and starting to say them to where it's no different than saying elbow, ears, head, marker, lamp. It really is doable when you start to say it enough that you reduce the emotional charge, because that's a conditioned thing. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
That's just our own conditioning. And so if you practice and you write this list of words and say them, that'll start to become more natural.
Yeah. So then when you're in bed, you can say something like, can you put more pressure on my clitoris, and it doesn't feel weird.
Okay. So I'm going to speak to something about that.
Yeah.
Is that can be a really personal thing, because so if we were talking about sexy talk and communicating, for some people, they're going to be like, nope, I feel I'm at the gynecologist.
Right.
Don't use those terms.
Anatomical term.
Don't do that.
They want more slang or nothing at all.
I mean, that could honestly be one of the conversations, because there might be something that's really turning you off. And we'll get to the orgasm episode next week, so we're not going to go there. But language, I've had, it's not necessarily couples, but as I'm talking with friends, I've had a friend that was like, I don't really like it when he uses my anatomically correct terms.
Right.
Like, I'm touching your labia. She's like, don't do that. And so that's
the mood is killed.
Right. So it's practicing the words, but which is great. That's a good skill also for parents and talking to their kids. But even just practicing these conversations and identifying the kind of the lingo that works for you, because there's a lot of lingo that doesn't work.
Totally.
So there's an aside for that.
Cool. So say the words that make you feel uncomfortable out loud.
Yeah.
What about like
repeatedly?
We alluded to this a little bit, but ways to give feedback.
Yes.
You said right after sex, only give positive feedback. But what about if you have something negative to say? How would you, like, it, not necessarily negative, but like, hey, I want you to change this.
Yeah.
How would you address that?
First, I would say I would love for this to improve, because it's different of, hey, I want you to change this versus I would love for this. Because a lot of, I find a lot of couples, they want to know what they can do better. So the way I do it is a positive sandwich. I love how you tickle my arms. I love how you stroke my hair. I love how you kiss me. You start off with something you love, because who doesn't love to hear that feedback? It also gives you a chance to be like, I do love that. Like, it's not all bad.
Yeah.
I love, and you can list a lot of things. Then the next thing would be, and what I would love more of, what I'm wondering if we can talk about changing. I'm wondering if this could improve. I'm wondering if this could be different. I'm not saying you need to do this.
Right.
I'm still posing it in a collaborative conversation
where it's not accusatory. It's collaborative.
It's collaborative,
and it's partnership, which is what your relationship should be.
Yeah. So I do that, and then there can be a lot of conversation there. And then it would be following up of, but I really want you to know how much I love you. I really appreciate you having the time for this conversation. I appreciate you being willing to talk about it, etc. And that's the positive sandwich. It's the positive, what you would like to change or improve, and then the positive again. And
you can totally set this up like where this is part of the rules, but you can say every time we have sex, after we have sex, maybe the next day, the next morning, or the next evening, we're going to have a positive sandwich. We're going to talk about what went really well, what we liked, what we would like less of or more of and would like to change, and then express appreciation for each other. That's just part of the rules that you create for the conversation that you're going to have every single time.
Yeah.
Okay, what else do we have here? We made a couple of notes.
I think set a timer. Because again,
tell me about that.
Okay, so if you are, let's say you have been sitting on the couch for 2 months or 2 years. Okay, let's say you've been, not like all the time, you're going to work, you're doing that, but you really just haven't. I know for me, after I had my babies, and particularly after baby number 3, it rocked my world in a whole new way. And my physical activity, my ability to just get as active as I want, like I used to, it really changed. And so as I'm working to get more active again, I'm not going to the gym and and this is a real thing. I'm not going to the gym and running at a number 5 on the treadmill for 60 minutes. I'm out of shape.
You're starting by walking around the block.
I'm going to pull muscles. Yeah, that's
so you're not
going
to go join CrossFit like right after you have a baby.
I'm not going to do that.
Right.
No.
So this is your way of like scaling, basically not letting something spiral out of control or taking on too much at the same time.
Yeah. If you like this whole metaphor, if you haven't if you guys aren't practiced, because if we view it as a skill, if you're not practiced at having these conversations about sex, don't just dive into an open-ended conversation, because most of the time that can end really bad, and you're trying to create a positive cycle. And so even setting the timer to say, we'd love to talk about this for 5 minutes. We're going to talk about this for 10 minutes.
We're going to talk about it for 10 minutes, and we're only going to talk about things that we really enjoy.
Yep. And then the other key there is to, so you got really specific on what it's going to be. There's also something that's really interesting, because the reason why setting a timer, because if you start to get anxious, frustrated, angry, there's a therapist and researcher by the name of David Schnarch, and he researched couples, and he had them wear heart rate monitors when they were fighting. And he discovered that when their heart rates got above 90 beats per minute, they moved into the part of their brain that makes them fight.
The fight or flight
mechanism.
mechanism.
And they can't even like have a rational conversation. And so if you notice that you're starting to get heated, you're starting to get elevated, and
you physiologically cannot think logically and have a
you can't. And so it's at that time to close the conversation and be like, I notice I'm starting to get angry.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get hurt. I'm getting really anxious. So let's be done. We know we're practicing. We know we're not supposed to be perfect at this.
That requires a lot of self-awareness.
It does. And it's practice.
And it's lots of practice.
You may flounder and turn into a fight, and then you can do a repair and be like, I'm so sorry about last night. Let's keep working at this.
I should have stopped myself. I noticed that I was getting defensive, and next time I'm going to try harder to end the conversation before going. Even if
couples do that repair 2 days later.
Yeah.
It makes a world of difference.
Huge difference.
And just keep sticking with it.
Love it. So along with setting a timer, I like the idea of having a specific time where you talk about sex. Like maybe it's the first half of your weekly date night or something like that. So
I'm going to speak to, again, the moms out there, that I don't know about you, but for me, I don't have time that just shows up where I'm like, oh, spare time. I've got 3 hours. Fantastic. Let's talk about sex. That's not a thing. From carpools to getting kids into bed, baths, jammies, breakfast, then planning for the whole next day. If I don't plan it, like I'm planning everything in my life. Right. If I don't sit down,
put it on the calendar,
it won't happen. And so if it's a priority and it matters, which we hope it will, then you can start to have those conversations. But I would plan it.
I've got somebody at my door.
You've got people here.
That's funny. Unexpected people.
Do you want me to let them in?
No.
Okay.
Well, I'll talk to them later.
So yes, planning it, putting it in just like you would the carpool, putting it in, put it down and be like, we're going to talk about this twice this week. We're going to talk about this once, and leverage it on a good time.
I'm blushing.
I think I'm red too. That's funny. I felt, yeah.
Okay. I love it.
Okay.
Get it on the calendar.
The next thing I would also say, and this kind of goes back to monitoring your emotions as you're having these conversations, is tolerating discomfort for growth.
Oh man, I love
which
that.
Which is why the timed conversations, because I can only tolerate so much discomfort for so long.
Right.
Before I all of a sudden I'm going to explode.
This is another David Schnarch principle.
It is.
So in his book, Passionate Marriage, which I just finished, and it's like my new favorite thing. I loved it. I'm going to read it like a million times in my life.
It's really good.
But one of the big takeaways that I got out of that text is he says marriage is a human growth machine. The whole purpose of marriage is to help you grow and evolve into a better version of yourself.
That's right.
And your partner is going to put pressure on you, and they're going to make things difficult for you. And the reason that they do that, and the reason that marriage is hard, is because it requires us to grow if we want to be good at it.
Yeah, I often talk about how aging is not a choice. Maturing is. Yeah. Like I've met a ton of really immature people.
Yeah, there's
like we have to grow ourselves up, and tolerating discomfort for growth and managing our emotions and doing this is hard.
Yeah,
but it's necessary.
I heard a great analogy the other day. It was by Stephen R. Covey's son, Stephen Covey.
Okay,
but he told a story of this guy who was angry because he didn't get promoted, and this guy who was younger than he was got a promotion over him. And he said something along the lines of, you've been working for 20 years in this job, but you've worked the same year 20 times. Whereas this guy who's been here for 10 years has had 10 years of consecutive growth.
Yeah.
And I think if you think about your marriage or your relationships, are you consistently growing, or were you basically repeating the same day, the same week, the same month, the same year over and over and over again, and not changing, evolving, and improving yourself?
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to get caught into that spiral or caught into that trap of just reliving the same year over and over and over.
Yeah. And you talk about changing, like you have this thing called the 1% club.
Yeah.
You change 1%, and what that does over time is it improves exponentially.
Oh yeah.
Just 1%. And so
it's like if you improve 1%, if you improve 1% every day for a year, the return on your investment is over 3,000%.
Yeah, see, that's amazing.
It's crazy.
So I'm looking at our time, and
we're almost out.
We're almost out, which is first podcast. Way to go. And thanks for all the everyone being here and joining in. We've seen the hearts, and thank you.
And the little comments.
We felt the love. But what I'd say is, in terms of our takeaways of this conversation, would be to first start with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that are going well, or what kind of conversation would you like to have? What would you like to have? How would you like it to be? How would you like it to feel? What would you like the tone to be? Like, really, there's a lot of, I see on Pinterest, a lot of vision boards.
Yeah.
You can create an actual or even imaginary vision board. Like, envision what that conversation is going to be like and what you would like. And then I would list, like, here's all the things that I love about my partner. These are the things I love how they smell, how they taste. Write it all down and get reconnected with why you fell in love in the first place.
Yeah.
And then
come from that space of love and appreciation and wanting to improve. Yeah. And not criticism and what's going wrong and what's hard.
And potentially set the date to then approach your partner and say, I want to have a conversation about having a conversation about sex.
Yeah.
You don't even have to start the conversation. Just schedule I want to have the conversation about the conversation, and go back and replay Nate's whole thing about how enthusiastic he was to have the conversation. But find your own style on that.
Yeah.
And if you started there and just begin there and see where it took you, and then stuck with it, I can promise you that you will get better at doing this and talking about sex.
So if you do take action, we would love to hear about it. In the description of this episode, you'll see some of our contact information. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you thought, or if you have any questions. And just a quick tease for next week, Kristin already kind of teased it a little bit, but we're going to be talking about orgasm, and more specifically, we want to talk about
why we can't orgasm.
Orgasm is kind of elusive. If you have ever been in that position where you're like, oh yeah, here it is, there it is, I got it, and it's gone. Like, if you've ever had that narrative in your head, or if you're just frustrated that you've never had an orgasm, or you don't know if you've ever had an orgasm, or if you just get frustrated that it takes you so long to have an orgasm, we're going to be talking about that topic.
Especially, so we're going to look at orgasm, but then if orgasm in the baby making years, there can be a whole bunch of things. There's so much to talk about with orgasm, and I can't wait.
Awesome.
Send us your questions. We would love to have your questions,
or
your comments, your feedback, because that can help just make the community more dynamic.
And the very last thing is, if this podcast was interesting to you, Kristin and I are working on a course that's called Demystifying Desire. And we're selling it right now. If you go to loveschool.first7years.com, there should be a link in the description as well to that. You can get it at an discounted price, at an early bird special price. And do you want to tell a little bit about, give them a tease of what we're going to cover in the course?
Well, desire is just another one of those things that is really elusive. Like, you either have it or you don't. Who has it? Who's the lucky
one?
Where
does it come from?
How do I get it? And so we really break down what that is, and really help women feel really empowered with desire and actually feel like that can be theirs.
And we'll talk more about that in coming weeks as well. But if you want that early bird pricing, I would jump on it quickly.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in,
Thank
guys.
you so much.
See you next week.
Okay.
Bye.